Yeah, one of the topics I got interested in, spirituality in general, and how it coexists with modern thinking, with logical thinking. These Cree hunters, for example, know about animals better than, certainly better than, as well as any biologist, and that they spend hours looking at them. So they have that empirical knowledge, and for me, as a as somebody coming from a totally different tradition, I'm struggling over how they can also have these deep spiritual beliefs about things in the environment, that real things, not just fantasies or dreams, although dreaming, of course, is extremely important. One of those, while I was living with the Cree, and you would miss it if you didn't pay attention. They would be almost matter-of-factly, a piece of bone would be held on a piece of stick in front of the fire, and then a young child would usually be told to take it around to show it to everybody in the camp once it had been burned. This was scapulomancy, this thing. And while most of and I saw, 20, 30 different occasions. It wasn't just done, and it certainly wasn't done for me. And, they would, some of this stuff had power in the sense that children were hidden under the blankets. They couldn't, there were certain precautions. But compared to what we think of as rituals or ceremonies or that, these are very subtle and often missed. But on the other hand, they're very modern. A lot of them related to where we would expect to find game. The essential job was to tell us where to go and look for game. But they used it also. We'd made an arrangement with the Hudson Bay manager, who came twice a year by aircraft. We were waiting at the lake, or frozen lake, where he was going to land. At the date we'd assigned, we kept track of time all through the winter and knew what date it was. And every morning and night while we waited, scapulomancies, numbers and numbers were done to predict the arrival of the aircraft. So, they're very modern in their believing it. And then people would tell their dreams, and all of these things would be put together to try and figure out what was about to happen. Now, what I noticed was the interpretation was never very definitive. They might say, oh, well, we're unfortunate, we don't have any wise old people who know how to read the bones. But I found this so often that it was the sort of, in other words, the meaning of the oracle only became clear after the fact. And then they would explain, see, that was the moose you killed there, and that. They would, some of them never got explained. Some of them were duds. They couldn't figure out what the oracle was saying. And where, the two prominent papers on the issue of scapulomancy among the Cree and Innu at the time was, number one, randomizing, that the theory was that while the bone would not show where the animals were, this was the Western scientific approach, they'd say it send you off in random directions. Whereas the problem they saw was a hunter will tend to return again and again to where he's been successful in the past. And this breaks that habit, because the animals obviously don't return, certain animals do return again and again to where but not all animals do. And anyway, for the animals they were after. So that was one theory. The other theory was that this is a difficult decision. A group has to decide, do we pick up camp and go there? We have to decide collectively. And so that theory was, rather than putting the onus on a leader to have to make the decision, and then maybe it be discovered there's no animals there at all, and he looks like a fool. But this was, so they'd make the group, it would externalize the decision. The decision would be made by somebody other than the group, and the group would follow it. And if they were wrong, too bad. But that was the two theories. My third theory was, it was an exploration of the pre-existing spiritual beliefs, that by being able to explain a hunt afterwards in terms of what the spirits had foretold, you're giving empirical demonstration of your beliefs, shall we say, and that sort of thing. So, I certainly didn't, I guess I've never been able, there is a movement in some anthropologists who suggest that in writing about an indigenous group's beliefs, you write accepting those beliefs as factual, and write the book as a native person would who actually believes these things. As a Marxist, I guess I come from the position that religion is a fantasy created for certain purposes to maintain the social order in a certain way, and so I quite happily went into writing Bringing Home Animals without any pretense that I was presenting the spirits as factual, presenting the outcome of divination as factual, as presenting any of this. Now, I've been criticized for that since. There is certainly a convention, even among earlier anthropologists from Malinowski on, to what Malinowski says is to see things from the native's point of view. And that, I agree, I've got to understand that. But then if I'm doing my own attempt to analyze those things, once I've got some level of understanding of what the native point of view is, that to me is not the end of anthropology. Then, again, I'm a comparative. How do we link this together with what other people do in other cultures and come to some intelligence about what might be behind all of this? Now, that's incredibly speculative, and we wasted, if you like, a lot of time in anthropology pursuing mathematical models and abstractions to try to link together diverse cultures that have cross-cousin marriage or have this or that, and why they all do it. And I was in graduate school when I was immersed in all of that literature and it's amazing how little of it has been used today. So, but we had to go, I think, through all of those exercises in this pursuit of a comparative understanding of humanity from the individual cases. And obviously, belief in spiritual things is still very much alive, even with industrial society, even with Christianity, even, so that one still among the Cree, there's revival of spiritual movements along particularly the James Bay coast. Since I was there, there's a lot more happening in terms of people are linking up with the Pan-Indian movement and going to sun dances, where they torture themselves. This is so it's not the case that the introduction to industrial society suddenly removes all of these. People suddenly become like us in that sense. Some of them do, some, but it's their own decisions, and I'm keeping an eye on the interesting developments in spirituality that are still occurring today in traditional societies.